Hello and welcome to the Connected World here at IBC 2013. With me is Max Brown, a Senior Systems Engineer with Coraid. Max, thank you for joining us here today. So, Coraid, a new participant at IBC. What exactly do you guys do?
So Coraid started off in the high-performance compute market many years ago, focusing on Linux systems, which obviously lend themselves to things like sequential media, high throughput. Many years ago, if you look at broadcast, it was kind of very low frame rate, it was very low resolution. Now what we see is, the approach of big data. A lot of people talk about big data as kind of a catch-all term. So many years ago, what you found is you had a few large systems with not a lot of data. What we have now is lots of smaller systems with huge amounts of data on them. So the way that Coraid's progressed is in terms of high-performance compute. Again, as I mentioned, it's like sequential throughput, which is exactly how we fit well with media.
Okay. So, you mentioned high-performance compute, but there are a lot of similarities between HPC environments and media entertainment. So you work with a number of media brands. What types of tasks do you work with? Is it play out or
so we work well with things like video ingest. We work well with play out, doing 2K streams, 4K streams, a lot of visual effects, a lot of rendering tools are used on our systems, but also the flexibility of Coraid. Hence why we seem kind of new to the broadcast industry, is that we've not only focused on the media side, we've also traditionally been focusing on traditional virtualization environments, things you'd find in a Fortune 100 environment such as banks, finance, retail, etc., manufacturing. But the fact is that Coraid can be very flexible. So we're not a niche product. A lot of the vendors that I've seen at IBC have very good storage solutions, but it's fixed purely for the broadcast sector. So if you had some databases that you wanted to run or some different type of workload, you'd have to buy a different solution. Whereas with Coraid, we can approach all of those different sectors and actually tackle each of them.
So I know we've spoken in the past, and I know that the type of technology that you use is relatively unusual. It's a serial ATA over Ethernet.
Yeah.
What is that?
So what we use, so when you're looking at storage, basically there are two protocols that people mainly use. You've got Fibre Channel and you've got iSCSI. So Fibre Channel is fast, but it's complex, it's fairly costly. iSCSI is based on Ethernet, it's TCP/IP, but because of that large stack, it can actually be quite cumbersome. What we use as the protocol to actually connect to our storage at the back end is a protocol called ATA over Ethernet. This is a layer 2 protocol, so it's very low latency, it's very fast, or to put it very simplistically, we give you the performance of Fibre Channel at the cost of iSCSI, and it's based on standards-based Ethernet. So there's very little complexity. Because it's layer 2, we've avoided the whole TCP/IP layer 4 stack, so very fast, very easy to manage, and very, very scalable.
And media entertainment is notorious for requiring very high performance metrics.
Yeah.
Things like SATA and SAS and SSD. What types of technologies do you integrate into your stack?
So for those things, we actually, and again, this is the flexibility of Coraid. We use SATA, we use SAS, and we use SSD. You can mix and match those in our systems. We have no configuration rules as to what you can and can't deploy. If you want a couple of SSDs, a few SAS, and loads of SATA within the same system, we can do that. We can segment it all off. For media streaming, for kind of media workloads, then our storage arrays have basically a NAS functionality that sits in front of them. And that NAS functionality, generally it's a lot of SATA drives at the back end, but we can also couple that with SSDs. So if you want to accelerate your reads, accelerate your writes, we have an SSD caching layer, but with SATA at the back end. So in other words, we have SSDs that are doing all of your high performance workload, but all of your data is stored on low cost, basically what I'd call cheap and deep SATA.
Okay.
So it's very cost effective. And in terms of throughput metrics, we can get about 4 gigabytes a second out of one of our heads. And generally most people would have more than one head and loads of drives behind.
We know that in our industry with the arrival of 4K and much more content monetization, capacities are growing. What type of scale does a Coraid system go to?
So generally with our NAS system, so you can start off as small as having one shelf with a handful of drives. Generally what we see in the media sector, we're selling to customers that have 50 terabytes upwards. But what we can have is you can have a couple of the NAS heads serving out NFS or CIFS or whatever protocol you need to serve out. Behind that, you can just scale out the storage. So our largest systems, generally we can get up to like a petabyte and a half behind a couple of heads. But our largest customers have about 7 petabytes. So it's a case of you scale the part that needs scaling. So if you need to scale out the storage, you can add more storage cells, add more SATA drives. If you need to scale out the compute layer in terms of the throughput, in terms of the I/O or the bandwidth, you add more NAS heads.
Okay.
So it's a very scalable solution, opposed to other systems where you may have to buy one huge system up front and grow into it. With Coraid, you grow as and when you need to.
And typically, who are your media entertainment customers? Are they production houses or service providers or content providers? Who do you typically work with?
Yeah, so it's kind of a combination of all of those, to be honest. So I'll name just a couple of our largest customers. So i365 in Iceland, these guys are basically doing IPTV and broadcast for pretty much all of the TV stations in Iceland. What they've done is, with one single Coraid system, they use literally, I guess the easiest way to describe it is one half is used for playout and one half is used for ingest. Okay. Now, because of the way we can segment the workloads, the issue they had with previous storage, because it was one large pool, they were doing ingest and playout from one system, and then they find that if the ingest was too heavy, it hampered the playout. Okay. With Coraid, because we can split it quite easily, it's still one pool of storage, but we can kind of segment it or make it multi-tenant, then the ingest and the playout do not trample on each other's toes.
That's a production environment that
yes. So another one of our largest customers is a company called Digital Latin America, which the easy way to describe it, these guys are the Netflix for South America, and they do a lot of IPTV as well, and they've got about 7 petabytes of Coraid. And again, it's the same story. They scaled out the storage when they needed it, they scaled out the compute when they needed it. They didn't have to plan and buy a system that would last 3 or 5 years. They bought what they needed today, and then they just scaled it as and when necessary.
I know, Max, that you're a bit of a storage whiz kid or guru.
Yeah.
When wandering around this show, are there any things that have hit your eye, not necessarily products, but trends or emerging patterns that you've seen around storage and the M&E space?
Again, a lot of it is around 4K. Everyone's kind of focused on 4K, but then you've got the media asset management. And the common theme is, as everything gets digitized, people are filming things at a higher frame rate, at higher resolutions. This just equates to an explosion of data. And it's a case of, how do we manage that data? How do we store it? And for a lot of people, it's coming down to, how can we store it effectively, how can we manage it, and how can we protect it? So, if I've got a couple of petabytes of data, what happens if an entire disk shelf with, 30 or 60 drives goes offline? How can I protect that? So we have all of the built-in mechanisms to make sure that, if you have major hardware failures, your system remains online. And again, because we're based on Ethernet, for those customers that have maybe a campus solution, or if they're kind of within the M25, then what you may find is that they may have a production site and a DR site, but if they have fast fiber links, we can literally split the environment, so it's one logical environment split between 2 sites. So even if you had an entire building go down, no one would be any the wiser. The production would maintain running.
Well, we're seeing a very similar thing when we talk to both broadcasters and technology companies. There's a lot more of a focus now on building resiliency.
Yeah.
It's clear that some of your customers, some people we've spoken to here, they're multi-site, multi-country, transatlantic productions need to have storage that's designed for those types of situations. Are you finding that customers are now asking you more intricate questions around how your storage will work with things like cloud or CDNs?
We're finding that a lot more. So again, in terms of things like CDNs, we tend to kind of sit at the back layer. The CDN is obviously a layer above us, but we can feed up to the CDN quite efficiently. And also because of the SSDs, we can feed it very rapidly, and we can also respond very quickly to their needs. And as they need to scale out, again, the key themes, as you've kind of picked up by now with Coraid, it's the flexibility, and it's the scalability, and the manageability. And those are the 3 key things that every customer needs, because the last thing you want is to run out of capacity and then find that in order to expand, you have to spend $500,000 on a whole new system, rather than spend a fraction of that cost and just expand the portions that need the performance or the throughput.
Max, thank you. You've been very, very enlightening to us. And that's it. Max Brown from Coraid, and we thank you all for your time and joining us once again.